Thank you very much for joining today's webinar, Web Goodbye to Plastic Pollution, a Journey from Source to Sea, hosted by Stockholm International Water Institute and the United Nations Environment Programme. I am Sayaka, working for UNEP as a consultant. Can you go to the next page? This is an agenda for today's 90 minutes webinar. First, a presentation on the context and importance of transboundary plastic pollution, followed by an introduction to source-to-sea management for tackling plastic pollution. Afterward, we will have a short Q&A sessions. Following that, we are inviting 4 experts to showcase examples of incorporating source-to-sea perspectives to address the plastic pollution, which will also be followed by a Q&A session. Next page, please. So before we start the webinar, I'd like to cover 2 housekeeping matters. First, please ensure your audio is turned off, especially during the presentations. The second, for questions, please submit the questions through the group chat box, specifying the speaker to whom you like to direct each question. So now let's move to the first agenda item. Next page, please. So let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Mushtaq Memon. He has been with UNEP since 2005, working in areas of plastic pollution, circular economy, sustainable consumption and production, air pollution, waste and water pollution. He currently serves as a regional coordinator for the Chemicals and Pollution Action Sub-Program at UNEP's regional office for Asia and the Pacific, and leads multiple projects focused on air pollution and plastic pollution. He will now give a presentation on the context and importance of transboundary plastic pollution to set the scene of this webinar. So hand it over to you, Mushtaq.
Thank you, Sayaka. And thank you very much. So thank you everyone for joining us for this very important webinar. They're looking mainly in the capacity building for addressing plastic pollution. But as due to the limited time for today's webinar, we are focusing, or I'm focusing more on the how we work across the different countries for the transboundary. As this project, Mekong Pacific project funded by Government of Japan, is aiming for the plastic-free rivers, and many rivers like Mekong, they are transboundary rivers. So basically, plastic waste of one country can travel to the plastic waste of other country, and then plastics also through rivers get into the marine environment, and marine environment is again transboundary. So this is why we are looking at this in a transboundary context, whether it be the rivers or whether it be the end site that's a marine environment that's also transboundary. And so the effect from one country's waste can be also to the other countries or other regions as well. So next slide, please. So this here, when we are talking about the how we know or how we can manage the transboundary challenges of the plastic pollution, the first or the most important point or starting point is the monitoring and assessment. Because as we see that in many countries, monitoring and assessment is not yet up to the level that can give us a very clear picture of understanding of the plastic waste or the plastic pollution within a country context and also within the regional or the transboundary context. And this is where we are looking at that, how we can build the monitoring and assessment at the national level. So that helps also in addressing the transboundary plastic pollution issues. Next slide. So for this reason, we are trying to work with the countries to do the first capacity mapping for the monitoring, that what type of capacities are needed at the local level, at the national level, and also at the regional level. For example, in Mekong, we have been working closely with the Mekong River Commission and to build the capacity at the regional level for the transboundary issues. And then also the second step is based on the mapping, that to understand what are the current or existing capacities. So we can only fill the gaps, because otherwise it's a huge investments and time required for the build the monitoring capacities and so on. So that is very interesting part of an analysis or the working groups that we work with that understand the existing capacity and the gaps there. And then also this, we look in the context of the future capacities for required, because some of the materials may not be yet on the table or invisible. For example, we are talking about now the nanoplastics and the microplastics in the transboundary context, whether it be through the rivers or even now sometimes through air. So this is also important to look in the future capacities on that. Next slide, please. So for that reason, we are working with the countries to understand the current level of their legal and policy frameworks for the monitoring like systems, the institutional arrangement for the monitoring and assessment systems, and the finance and human resource capacities for that system, and then system and influencing the capacities. So what really, like, for example, the universities, whether they are sufficient technical universities in countries to do so, or whether there's a community's sense and working together is there or not. So these are the important things. And then, of course, the operational capacities, including the technology and so on. Next. So as we see that currently we are under capacity for the monitoring and assessment at local, national, and even regional level. So there we are looking at the different ways, the challenges, as I say, financial challenges, technology challenges, methodology challenges, institutional challenges, legal and policy framework challenges, and more important of the local like capacities, availability challenges, and so on. Next. So, for example, when we talk about the capacity, this is just an example, one of the examples which we can bring in to see. Suppose EU, they have doing this material flow analysis. That means it's based on the monitoring and assessment of the plastic waste and the plastic pollution, the leakages and everything. So, for example, they do like on time basis, like a yearly or monthly and so on. So I just give you the examples of this 2014. Here you can look at the recycling is at 2,580 tons, for example, and sorting is 6,200. Then if they compare to the further down the road, next slide. So here you can see in this 25, they're like a projection that recycling goes more than double, like a 12,000 beyond, and sorting also goes more than double on 16,000. So basically, and the leakages reduce. So this is very important for the monitoring and assessment when we are talking about the plastic leakages in the national context or the transboundary context. Next slide. So when we are talking about the monitoring, it's not only the downstream, basically it's across the life cycle or the value chain of the plastics, that how much plastic, even the waste is produced at the production level, and what is happening, whether that waste is reutilized or going to the like final waste or going to the leakages. Similarly, whether that's in the transportation to the consumers or the retails and so on. So basically at the life cycle, we can understand how much plastic waste is coming out and how much plastic waste is reutilized at the different levels, and how much plastic waste is managed properly, and how much plastic leakages in the environment are happening. Next, please. So at the end of the day, if we can have a very good capacities on monitoring and assessment, we should have a flowchart like this, that from different sectors, agriculture sector, transport sector, housing, buildings, food sector, and domestic sector, and so on, we can really understand that what type of the plastic leakages are there, what type of plastic waste, what type of plastic waste reutilization is there, and so on. And this helps to really address the gaps or the starting with the low-hanging fruits in the economic terms for interventions. Next. So also the capacities on the physical leakages is one, but then also the assessment capacity of the environmental impacts economic impacts and social impacts is very, very important. And this is where we have to bring the interventions in the context of the cost-benefit analysis, because the resources are scarce. And that's where I use the word low-hanging means, where you can have a higher environmental impacts, social and economic impacts. You prioritize those interventions first. So this is very, very important to have assessment capacities for the impacts as well. So this is environmental impacts list, and as the slides will be shared with you, so you can go through that. And in the interest of time, I just mentioned those important points. Next slide. So next, as I mentioned, is about the economic impacts, even on the tourism, on the fisheries, for example, or even in the food chain and so on. So there are different economic impacts as well. So which is important to see how you assess those impacts as well. Next. And as I mentioned, that social impacts also very, very important, because this is the gender-based social impacts. This is the vulnerable classes or the poverty-based social impacts and so on. And so this is about the equity and equality as well. So this is also important, that how we have a capacity to do, understand the social impacts. Next slide. So we have been working for years, I would say, that to build the capacities on monitoring and assessment of the waste in all streams, including plastics. And we have quite many guidelines. We have done quite many pilot projects and so on in UNEP. And this is where you may like to refer, and or you can also ask us. We can guide you on that. Next. So when we organize the trainings on the capacity building, that you may see that we start with the definitions, because it's very important to understand the context of the plastic leakage in different countries, and then to see how the transboundary plastic leakage is even monitored or calculated, for example. So definitions are very, very important. And then also the different sectors contributing the plastic pollution, whether it be industrial sector, whether it be the agriculture, municipal sector, and so on. And then across the value chain, from the source reduction or to coming to the primary disposal, coming to the recycling and leakages. Next. So this is our sort of a guiding diagram, that on the one hand, we have the sort of cross linkages across the line, including the policies, technologies, financing, stakeholders. Other is a value chain. And then more important, on the top is the different stakeholders, because they are the best people who can guide us on those capacity gaps and so on. Next. So we work together with the government, with the private sector, and also with the consumers, and to build the capacity on the plastic pollution-free planet. So on the monitoring as well. Next. So this is the last slide. So basically, it's important to understand the capacity needs at the national and subnational level, and also then regional level, and to bring the knowledge to leapfrog. And this is very important for the leapfrogging, and then to help the countries to come up with the action plans for the monitoring and assessment. Next. So thank you very much. Back to Sayaka.
Thank you very much, Mushtaq, for your comprehensive presentations. A presentation about the monitoring and evaluation of plastic leakage across the plastic value chain, especially focusing on the capacity development. So to the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to write your question to Mushtaq at the chat box. We will have a short Q&A session after the next presentation. So our second speakers are Miss Dana Dedek and Miss Jose Pablo Melio. Miss Dana Dedek is a program officer in the Water Resources Department at CB, where she has worked for 1.5 years. She specializes in the Source to Sea program and contributes actively to the action platform for Source to Sea management. Prior to her role at CB, Dana worked as a due diligence consultant in environment, health and safety, and environmental social governance for the environmental consultancy. She holds a Master of Science in Environmental Sciences and Sustainability Studies from London University and a Bachelor of Science in Molecular Ecosystem Sciences. Another speaker, Mr. Jose Pablo Murillo, is a program manager at the CIVI, where he has been part of the Source2Sea team for nearly 4 years. He contributes to the implementation of Source2Sea project and hosts the Secretariat of the Action Platform for Source2Sea Management. His experience includes conducting research on plastic pollution and implementing the Source2Sea approach to address it. Before joining the CIVI, he worked on a climate change mitigation and adaptation with UNEP and the German Cooperation Agency. Please welcome Ms. Dana and Mr. Jose for their presentation. So floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share our presentation, and I hope this works. Okay, thank you everyone to join the webinar. I'm very pleased to be part of this, and exciting to the ongoing discussion further along the session. But first, let me introduce you to the Source2Sea management approach. The Source2Sea management is a game-changing holistic approach to addressing challenges that are felt in more than one location or by more than one sector. And many development challenges are Source2Sea challenges. And just to give you an example of such challenges that span across the land, freshwater, coastal, and marine continuum, also referred to as the Source2Sea system, are changes to water flow and salinity, regimes due to energy production and water extraction, biodiversity loss from habitat fragmentation and loss of connectivity, sinking deltas as a result of sediment trapping upstream and excessive groundwater use, eutrophication from excess nutrients from agricultural runoff and untreated wastewater, but also a challenge that we are addressing right now at this very webinar, plastic waste in rivers and on beaches and in the ocean. Another challenge could be also, or is, reduced groundwater recharge and poor water quality due to loss of wetlands. And finally, decreased carbon sequestration due to an ecosystem degradation. So going back to the Source2Sea system, to explain it a bit more. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt, but we see the presenter view. So we just see the slides in a small.
Okay, because I see the, I don't see the presenter view, I see the big screen.
If you go, yeah, there,
the
3 dots.
My apologies. Can you see the big screen now?
Yes, but it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, I think it's because I'm sharing. Okay. Stop sharing for a second. Is it working now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So my apologies for that. So going back to the source-to-sea system, it refers to the biophysical continuum of the land area that is drained by river, its lakes and tributaries, connected aquifers and deltas, as well as estuaries, coast and nearshore waters, and the open ocean. These are known as source-to-sea segments. It's important to note that the environmental, social, and economic connections across the source-to-sea system flow both in both directions, from upstream to downstream, and vice versa. And those source-to-sea segments are connected through 6 flows: water, biota, and the sediment, as well as pollutants, materials, and ecosystem services. These flows naturally vary. However, human activities can alter these variations. And by assessing these changes in these flows, we can determine the flow of these individual segments, but also of the source-to-sea system as a whole. And can you see the new slides?
You see the slide with the source-to-sea system and the key flows.
Okay, because I'm changing it right now in my PowerPoint, but it doesn't seem to be working. No. The source-to-sea concept was developed to address the need for a more holistic approach to management of land, freshwater, and the coastal, as well as marine ecosystems. And these based activities are some of the largest of impacts to these ecosystems, and yet they are taken care of. Yes, and this management has really taken into account the upstream or downstream impacts. Resultingly, the governance has been mainly fragmented, overlooking the important links between the upstream and downstream counterpart areas in the source-to-sea system. It also tends to ignore gender perspectives and the voices that are usually marginalized by marginalized communities with different sectors working in isolation. And therefore, the source-to-sea concept offers a way to address these connections, providing a framework for more coordinated and inclusive governance. Respectively, this approach can lead to better outcomes for the entire source-to-sea system. By adopting a source-to-sea approach, governance can prevent activities in one part of the system from negatively affecting other areas. It also helps create benefits that flow back upstream. The key to effective source-to-sea management is stronger cooperation between upstream and downstream stakeholders, ensuring all interests are represented. It also requires better coordination across different sectors. This approach leads to clearer, aligned goals throughout the entire source-to-sea system and stronger governance overall. Greater cooperation between upstream and downstream areas, along with cross-sector coordination, is essential for source-to-sea challenges. Those challenges that I have presented in the beginning of the presentation, and it helps to generate real measurable benefits for the entire system. And just to give you a brief overview of the guiding principles that the source-to-see approach is following. It is holistic, collaborative, prioritizing, participatory, context-dependent, as well as results-oriented and adaptive. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to my fellow colleague, Jose Murillo, for going into more depth and introducing the new ILITA framework of the. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana, for this introduction on source-to-see management and source-to-see system and key flows. So as Dana mentioned, I will focus more now on the source-to-see approach that you previously mentioned, and especially on the marine litter prevention framework, which is an adaptation of the source-to-see approach, specifically for plastic pollution. So the source-to-see approach is a methodology to operationalize the source-to-see concept into projects and programs, and it's made up of 6 steps that follow the usual, let's say, project cycle, or is based on this. So I will share more details of each of the steps soon, but in summary, the first 3 steps create an understanding of the biophysical context, the stakeholders, and the governance framework. That you can see the steps on the slide. And then step 4 and 5, they involve developing a shared vision by the stakeholders and also the actions that need to be taken to achieve this. And step 6 is more about aims, it aims to monitor if the actions taken are making progress towards achieving the shared vision. Next slide, please. So the first step is characterize. So as I mentioned before, this allows us to understand the biophysical context of the area where the work will develop by studying and selecting the priority flows and setting a system boundary for the work. In this case, we already have the priority flow, right, which is plastic pollution, but we still need to refine this further. So it is important to identify the type of plastics that are entering the water bodies and how much is entering. This can include, for example, if it's packaging, if it's end-of-life products, if it's additive, if it's a mix of all of these, how they behave once in the water body, if it's buoyant or not, or how it behaves in the water column, and if it's releasing toxins or not. Also, the main sources of plastic entering water bodies, if it's consumers, if it's commercial activities, if it's industry or agriculture, and additionally, how it is entering water, if it's, for example, due to inadequate waste management, wastewater systems, or if it's due to direct littering or dumping. And finally, the main environmental, social, and economic impacts of plastic waste in water bodies, which is also something that already Mushtaq mentioned before. There are different methodologies to gather the data required, and this needs to be adapted according to the different contexts, right? Also, we need to consider that obtaining all the data is very challenging. So it's not necessary to have a complete data. The idea is to build a picture of the situation to inform decision-making. And also the stakeholders that we identify in step 2 can also help to complete this picture. So now we can go to the next slide. So then here we go to step 2, which is engage, and this aims to identify the relevant stakeholders, their roles, and how they participate in this process. So here we have 5 different stakeholder categories that you see on the slide, and the primary stakeholders are those who are negatively impacted by plastic pollution and who will benefit from intervention strategies to prevent it. The targeted stakeholders are the individuals or groups whose practices are contributing to plastic pollution, being leaked into rivers and marine environment, and whose behavior change is directly targeted. Then we have the enabling stakeholders, which are more like institutions that provide enabling conditions for behavior changes and benefits to occur and be sustained over time. Then we have the supporting stakeholders that are more like development partners and financiers whose strategies are aligned with the prevention of plastic leakage. And finally, external stakeholders, which are individuals or groups outside the system who share an interest in preventing plastic pollution. So after this categorization, it's important to conduct an assessment to have a better understanding of the stakeholders and how they can contribute to the next steps. And this, for example, can include understanding if the targeted stakeholders are aware of the impacts that they have due to the plastic leakage, what are the costs for the targeted stakeholders of implementing changes for them. Also, if for example, primary stakeholders are aware that they are being affected by plastic pollution and if they're aware where it's coming from. So these type of questions we need to clarify, to understand also the stakeholders in a better way. Next slide, please. So after understanding the biophysical context and the stakeholders involved, in step 3 diagnose, we look into the governance system. So the governance system is made up of all the policies, laws, regulations, plans, procedures, and institutions that deliver them. This can include the subnational, national, and international levels or frameworks. This sets the stage for how individuals, businesses, and public managers behave within the cycle of production, consumption, and disposal of plastic goods and packaging. And in this case, with plastic pollution, this involves not only across the plastics value chain, but also it can include frameworks related to solid waste management, wastewater management, and others. And plastic leakage into riverine and marine environments is taking place within governance systems that can address this. So like I said, in the plastic waste value chain, there can be different product specifications. There can be also different consumption patterns. Then also in the waste management governance framework, well, how that's working and how that can be improved. So then next slide, please. So after completing the previous steps, as I mentioned before, we develop an understanding of the linkages between plastic pollution and its impacts, who is contributing to plastic pollution, who is suffering from this, and the governance on different levels that tries to address plastic leakage. This information then guides step 4, which is the design of a theory of change that can be used to identify interventions that will lead to the changes in behavior and long-term impacts. This is done through an inclusive and participatory process that involves the stakeholders that we identified in step 2. Then the theory of change delineates the intermediate steps that will lead to the prevention of plastic pollution. And it describes the anticipated relationships between the actions that will be taken to establish the enabling conditions and lead to these desired changes. And this we can see in the slide where we have the first order of outcomes, then we have the second order of outcomes, then the third, and then the fourth, and how these accumulate on each other. Next slide, please. Then we come to step 5, which is act. And here is the implementation of the source to see actions that we designed in step 4. This also involves identifying and securing the funding sources to carry out the intervention needed. In the case of plastic pollution, this can require actions across different levels, as we see on the slide, from individual to the global, that leads to changes in behavior to accumulate and build progress towards preventing plastic pollution from entering water bodies. Next slide, please. Then finally, in step 6, adapt. The outcomes of the source to see actions are monitored, and if necessary, they are adapted according to the desired results. Monitoring will measure advances in the reduction of plastic pollution in river basins and identifies trends and captures knowledge so that it can be used to strengthen the theory of change and support adaptive management and collective learning. And here we have 4 types of indicators that can be used to monitor progress, which are, we can see in the slides, which are the process indicators that measure the successful establishment of the enabling conditions, then the stress reduction indicators that quantify changes in behavior and the practices that will reduce the amount of plastic that is being leaked, then the environmental status indicator that measure how the actions carried out, or let's say the behavior changes, are translating into an actual reduction of pollution. And lastly, we have the impact that then we measure the overall system from a long-term perspective. So to close, the 6 steps shared here from the Source to Sea Marine Litter Prevention Framework that is, focused, as I mentioned, on plastic pollution, they can be adjusted to different contexts. And this framework incentivizes cooperation between the upstream and downstream actors, as well as coordination across the sectors that are involved in the issue of plastic pollution. And they can come together to prioritize investments and establishing the enabling conditions that drive changes in behavior from the individual to the global levels that result in preventing plastic pollution. Thank you so much. Back to you, Saya.
Thank you very much, Dana and Jose, for your presentation of a framework of Source to Sea management and also its basic principle steps for the implementation, including stakeholder identification and etc. So let's move. I don't find any questions at the chat box. So, but still, if you have any questions, so please feel free to submit the question to the chat box. So let's move on to the next agenda items, which covers presentations on the examples of incorporating Source to Sea perspectives to address the plastic pollution by distinguished speakers from defined organizations. Each speaker will have 5 minutes for their presentations. After all the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So for questions, please submit them through the chat box as a last speakers as well. So our first speaker is Miss Joanna Miller Vega, a marine biologist and senior advisor at the Water Institute Deltares in the Netherlands. She has been working on plastic pollution for the past 15 years, particularly at the Science Policy Interface. Ms. Vega is a strong advocate of Source to Sea approaches to assess the plastic pollution and to better informed decision makers and drive effective solutions, with application in Europe, Southeast Asia, as she will highlight in her coming presentation. So over to you, Ms. Joanna.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here. I would like to thank this opportunity to present some of the examples of assessing the plastic flows in some countries in Southeast Asia, namely Indonesia and Thailand. I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know if it's okay. Is it on presentation mode?
Yes, now we can see.
Thank you. I'll just minimize here the window. All right, so yeah, well, we all know that this region is under the spotlight, having very intense degrees of plastic pollution. And faced with this challenge, the Indonesian government has pledged some ambitious targets for enhancing waste management and reducing plastic pollution. However, the challenge remains because there's a lot of limitation in terms of knowledge on the quantities and actually a baseline, a simple baseline against which to measure pollution. So based on this challenge, the World Bank in 2019, actually it's a little bit long ago, but they financed a few technical assistant assessments exactly to fill in some of these knowledge gaps. So I will introduce quickly the methodology. So we can frame it as a source-to-sea approach, because indeed what we tried to do was to assess the plastic waste flows from land-based sources and how it's carried down into the sea. So trying really to pinpoint what were the sources and how much plastic was actually leaking from these sources. So the methodology started by conducting a material flow analysis using local data, and this local data is actually one of the critical points to enable indeed this high granularity, high resolution knowledge. And then to really try to understand what were the waste handling practices that were leading to leakages. The second step was to integrate physical factors such as rainfall and to simulate basically how these mismanaged or unmanaged plastic can be mobilized by water, transported from land into waterways, and from there transported in the sea. And for the case of Indonesia, this was particularly important because I mean it's the largest archipelagos in the world. It has over 4,000 rivers and 1,000 more streams. So rivers are indeed a major pathway of transport of plastic from land into the sea. And this indeed that enable us to then estimate what were the inputs that the country as a whole is discharging, emitting into the sea. So the fact that we used local waste management or waste handling data enabled us to have, a catchment approach. So we see here a river basin delineation, giving us and showing us what were the critical areas that were contributing the most for unmanaged plastic, and what were the specific practices that were actually contributing to these leakages. And this is the type of the information that is critical to help prioritize interventions and to select exactly the type of interventions that are adequate to prevent plastic leakages. Integrating these waste analysis with hydrology, we were also able to have this very large-scale vision of what were the rivers that were contributing the most to these discharges. So we see here all the main catchments in Indonesia and how much they are contributing annually. So this was a baseline for a specific year, but how much they are contributing to plastic leakages. And this exactly helps also to prioritize where interventions can be most effective and those that can actually reduce to prevent larger discharges. So very shortly, just some reflections. So we all know that marine litter is not only a marine issue. So most of the plastic originates from land-based sources, and this is actually where prevention needs to happen. So the value of the source to sea is actually exactly to establish these relationships between what's happening in the more upstream domains with the levels of pollution. And this is something that we've seen more and more awareness, and also with the Plastics Treaty, this life cycle and these linkages between pollution and sources. So it's really very good. As mentioned by our first speaker, the resources are scarce. We cannot monitor everywhere. So it's really important to ensure that any selected indicators, any assessments, any monitoring is targeting exactly those points that are most meaningful for policy and that can actually help to guide the decisions in terms of interventions. And we know, of course, that there will always be a large level of uncertainty. This uncertainty will, of course, depend on the available data. And it's not only about having much more data, but also in terms of the quality of the data. And in this sense, it's important not only to integrate different domains, such as what's happening on land, in fresh waters, but also the marine environment, but also try as much as possible to integrate different approaches, different tools such as modeling, and also different data sources from in situ observations, possibly remote sensing, citizen science, as well as windows of opportunity. So this was just a snapshot. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Feel free to contact me if you want some more details. There's reports and publications available for this study, so you're also very welcome to have a look. And thank you so much, and I remain available for any questions you may have. Thank you. Back to you, Sayaka.
Thank you very much for the presentation on the case study of SOS2C approach in Indonesia, including very interesting result of hotspot data with very informative reflection points. Thank you, Joanna. So our next speaker is Dr. Mustafa Aydin, a zero pollution expert at the European Environment Agency. Dr. Mustafa is an environment expert with a PhD in Earth System Sciences, specializing in pollution monitoring and SOS2C marine litter assessment, with over 20 years of experience across various levels of the environmental field, from policy development to data and assessment. And now he works at the EEA. His core responsibilities include monitoring and assessing the EU Zero Pollution Action Plan. Specifically, he provides timely and actionable knowledge to policymakers on issues such as marine and freshwater pollution, the environmental impacts of maritime transport, plastic pollution, and marine litter. His goal is to support the creation of a toxic-free environment. The floor is yours, Dr. Mustafa.
Hello, everyone. So I didn't insist that you only focus that I have my PhD. So like I don't hear Dr. Mustafa too many times. For example, Joanna is also a doctor. I'm sure she's better than me, but thank you for emphasizing it and leaving me the floor. So as you heard, I'm working for the European Environment Agency, and I'm a zero pollution expert, which means that I'm generally working on pollution, in particular focused on plastic pollution in the Europe's seas, not worldwide, but we have good connections with also UNEP partners in different projects on the methodologies and everything. I will share a very short presentation with you. I hope it will be very interesting, and I would like to also thank you to Joanna taking the floor before me, and she was the project lead. Actually, together we led this project at the European Environment Agency. She was our consultant for this project. And the EEA published in 2000. I'm not very good about this. Share. Okay. Zoom. I'm not very good about Zoom. Do you see my screen? Presentation? No?
No, we cannot see. We are seeing some other screen.
Stop sharing, and then again, I'm so sorry for this delay, but really Zoom is not my strong point. Oh, share screen. Let's see. Yeah, I think I managed this time. Perfect. I think it should be there now. Yep. Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
From SOS2C, the untold story of the marine litter. This poetic headline belongs to the European Environment Agency 2023 report, which was based on 3-4 years of study together I mentioned with Joanna and her lead.
Sorry for the interruption, but can you change to the presentation mode?
I am in presentation mode, actually.
We are seeing the page.
Is it fine now? Should I try again? Technology. Is it fine now? I did it again. Maybe we should
we can see the editing mode, but I think we can go ahead with
Yeah, I think we should go, not still the time, because it's not the most important presentation of the webinar, but it will give you a good idea. This report was a good timely contribution to the knowledge base in Europe and the methodology for the assessment of marine litter. Why? Because the EU legislation is already moving towards, in 2010s, I guess mostly the focus is on integrated assessment of everything and integrated working of the legislation. On the right side, you see the European Union legislation, which is more relevant to this assessment and marine litter and plastic waste, starting from the source of the problem, packaging waste, eco-design, all the things that they will not become a waste. And the waste directive, single-use plastics directive also tries to prevent the waste first. And when you cannot prevent the waste, and the waste directive, landfill directive goes into the picture, they try to remediate the waste that it will not leak to the environment. And also the urban wastewater treatment plants, the same when there is wastewater. However, this waste somehow leaks to the environment. Some part of it cannot be managed with different factors because of diffuse sources or point sources like the wastewater treatment plants, diffuse sources like agriculture.
The slide is not moving. Sorry, the slide is not moving.
A timely contribution to knowledge base and methodology. Are we in that slide?
We are still seeing the editor mode.
So are we at the timely contribution to knowledge base and methodology slide?
No, still on the first one. Maybe
okay, then I will just speak. Screen. Is that fine? Yeah, I'm just trying to be so practical and not steal your time. I don't know why this happens. So
maybe
I can simply
maybe
speak.
AIT team can
okay.
help to share the screen, maybe. Yeah.
I will. Okay. Maybe you share the screen. Perfect. Is it fine? Yeah. You're totally right.
Now we can see the first slide. So maybe can you go to the next slide or which?
Yes. No, I'm already in the. Is it fine now?
And now we can see a timely contribution to knowledge base and the methodology.
Okay, sorry. I'm trying to be speaking very interesting, and I hope that this will cover all these delays in the presentation, and I hope that we still have the audience with us. So you see this slide that I was speaking to myself. Nobody was hearing me, but I was explaining this slide. Now with the picture, you can see, visualize in your mind the EU legislation regarding plastics, plastic packaging, pollution, and preventing pollution. It starts with preventing pollution with directives such as Eco-Design Directive, Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, Single-Use Plastics Directive. And then when it becomes Waste Directive, Landfill Directive, Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, and when to remediate the pollution, to establish a good status for the EU water soils, for example, the Water Framework Directive, Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and for sea-based marine litter and plastic pollution port reception facilities directive. All of these are under the Circular Economy Action Plan and the Zero Pollution Action Plan of the EU. And they need integration, they need to work together. The EU suggests that. So the idea didn't just pop up to have a suggested framework. Then we thought that how to assess this then integratedly, how to give a holistic picture to policymakers to track the problem and come up with solutions from source to sea, and to establish a methodology that can be example for the others, not only the EU, but also the member states, but also worldwide, a methodology explanation of the situation and providing solutions. And the report was published in 2023 after 4 years of work, revealed that majority of the marine litter in Europe was plastic waste, around 85%. And it started to assess the problem from the waste perspective, generated waste perspective. And we also looked at this data, 2021 and 22, the generated waste per person increased 22%. It was very interesting to see in the graphs that plastics production was increasing even though the GDP was decreasing in 2022. So this was a very dramatic thing that shows us how much plastics we use, and even our economy slows down, we increase. So therefore the plastic waste per person increased. Most of this plastic waste is plastic packaging, 40%, and small plastic items. And this is easy to assess, easy to find data, easy to work on waste data. So we chose this bulk of the plastics, around 70% of the plastics, and we assessed what is the fate of these plastics, what is happening after once they become waste. Once they become waste, some part of it's managed, some part of it is mismanaged and leaks to the environment. It was in 2018 around 3 million tons of wastes was leaking, plastic waste, packaging waste, and small plastics items to the European environment. And approximately 80% of the marine litter starts from the land. Pathways and outcome. So this is the source, this is the waste management, and after mismanaging the waste, this goes to the rivers, this goes by the wind. So we chose rivers because we could find data and studies, and the EU studies estimated that 226 million items are flowing to the European seas. And finally, we developed a tool to assess the pollution in the European seas, and 75 of the European seas are polluted with marine litter. This project, with different reasons, were very useful for stakeholder engagement, providing a holistic picture. Imagine a Van Gogh painting with missing pieces because data and methodology, estimations, they are not fully robust. Everything is not completely engaged to each other. These approaches are still developing and based on many estimations. However, still you can understand which painting is this. And the report finally suggests that we need concrete data, of course, harmonized monitoring and robust assessment methodologies to improve, to better help to integrate all these legislation, all these from source to sea facts and what is happening in the source, how it affects the sea on marine litter problem. The next step is more exciting. In 2026, we will publish a new report, new version of this report with stronger quantitative linkages between the source and pathways and the sea. And we will use the same estimation methodology to be consistent, material flow analysis. We will use updated waste reporting data. We will use an updated project on riverine litter estimations, how much is flowing. These are all new. And improved marine litter database we will have. That's great. And the JRC modeling, European Union Joint Research Center modeling, we will work with them, will help us to extrapolate the results, and we will assess the whole EU seas, Europe's seas. And the JRC also will help us for the outlook scenarios, which will show us if this policy was fully implemented, then how much waste reduction could we, or how much mismanaged waste reduction should the EU expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mustafa, for your presentation. So let me move to the next speaker, Ms. Lynn Sorrentino, a program officer for oceans at IUCN, where she focuses on plastic pollution. She manages an SME community, oversees multiple projects and deliverables, conducts technical plastic hotspotting training, and leads plastic communication. She's an expert in marine environment protection with a background in project management, sustainability, and circular economy initiatives. She holds an MSc in Marine Environmental Protection from Bangor University in Wales. In her role at IUCN, she leads projects aimed at addressing plastic pollution and promoting circular economy practices across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean and the Pacific. Ms. Sorrentino has contributed to significant publications, including a paper in Frontiers in Marine Science that outlines a global standard for shark area-based conservation and solution packages for plastic pollution. We'd like to hand it over to you, Ms. Lim.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation today, Jose and Ruth and the SEAWE team. And thank you also, Sayaka, for the introduction. Okay, now let's see if we can have the third time as the charm here, maybe for the Zoom and the sharing of screens. Whoops. So I just have a few slides, and Jose's directive to me when we were discussing this was why source to sea approaches are needed and really how IUCN does this work. So to start with and complement the work that was mentioned by Dr. Memon and also Joanna and others, marine environmental protection and protection of our rivers, all of this is transboundary, no matter what it is we're doing. And so, as mentioned, I think by everyone, plastic pollution sources are land-based, and IUCN's focus is really on closing the plastic tap. That lovely image that you showed, Joanna, of the plastic coming out of the tap is key to addressing these issues. And as they are transboundary, it is super important, I think, to think about this from a local, national, regional, and global perspective. Also, as mentioned, all land, water, marine ecosystems are affected by plastic pollution, and the monitoring that we've been doing within IUCN helps provide critical data on plastic sources, on their distribution, their impacts, and what we try to do with the data that we've collected and the work we are doing with the UNEP IUCN plastic pollution guidance for hotspotting is really to look at where the plastic is leaking into the environment. And then interpreting, on the map, the demographics, the hydrology, the source to sea approach really starts with that. And then looking at, for example, within Thailand, that anywhere you are in Thailand, within 70 kilometers, there's a coast or a river, which is contributing to the waste going into the marine environment. So the high surface water runoff drives the plastic leakage. When we talk a little bit about plastic pollution and the challenges we are all facing in all of our projects, in our research, in our daily work, the policy gaps are clear. And this is where I think a few people have mentioned briefly the need for understanding these. And this is what you talked about, I think, Jose, too, was the issue of creating a theory of change with appropriate indicators that can help measure that change, the behavior change, and the actual changes that happen. So the enforcement we wish to do as we think about policies and how they will fit into broader marine, multilateral environmental agreements, we need to think about that in terms of enforcement and how do you monitor? You have to have appropriate indicators. So the measures that we have to induce changes, those include looking at plastic pollution holistically from its entire value chain, from take, make, dispose, the whole thing, production to recycling to upcycling, etc. The trade patterns that we're seeing in our work, as we work in Africa and Asia and the Americas right now, trade and consumption of plastic is a key issue here for transboundary pollution. If you import a lot of plastic water bottles into your island, and you don't have a mechanism for dealing with them in terms of waste management, there will be some issues around trade of that waste somehow. So IUCN's focus, as you can see in the little graphic, we try to focus on biodiversity. We try to focus on the triple planetary crisis. We try to focus on how this is all interlinked. So we engage all of our projects, whether they are circular economy focused or capacity building focused or trade focused or negotiation focused. We engage with multiple stakeholders. So we engage with the private sector. We engage with the policymakers, with the government, with the NGOs, with the small and medium enterprises. And we try to do all of this through knowledge and technical transfer of knowledge, but also projects and solutions that are practical. And we have an Ubuntu platform that we use for a lot of our 300 plus solutions that us and other partners have developed over the last few years within IUCN. One thing that has come out of our work that is super useful is something called the blueprint. And this relates, I think, Dr. Memon, you had an icon as well around a blueprint that was produced. Our blueprint is really focused originally on island nations. And we're taking this blueprint as its guide, a journey to zero plastic waste, and we're looking at how do islands and countries look at it from a holistic, coordinated, collaborative management strategic approach. So understanding the problem, finding partners. So again, this is the multi-stakeholder approach and champions, looking how to map waste in each country. how to define the solutions that are appropriate so that when you have, especially transboundary rivers, what solutions will work for both or many of the countries involved. How do we link this to the existing policies? And I saw also, Jose, I think on your side, the issue around the different policies that are governing the different parts of the ecosystems that we all live within. This is really key. Then defining a true action plan, and then monitoring and coordinating the next steps. Once you've done a project and you know what's happening and you can understand within a country where the plastic is leaking and why the rivers are transporting it in a certain way and during the rainy season, etc., the monitoring has to loop back then again to an effective means of tracking this to improve the situation. And I have some links in my slides to share as well, and I think the slides are going to be available afterwards, and I'm happy to take questions. And thank you all for the presentation so far. And thank you, Sayaka.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Lin, which includes, which is very concise but clear message, and also in emphasizing the importance of trade of plastic. So please let me introduce our final speaker, Ms. Ruth Matthews. Ruth is a senior manager at the Stockholm International Water Institute, where she leads the Source to Sea program, which promotes holistic management source to sea systems, which we heard at the previous this presentation. She also served as the coordinator of the action platform for source to sea management, a network of organizations dedicated to promoting, building commitment for implementing source to sea actions to address key development challenges. Launched in 2014, the platform facilitates a knowledge exchange, generates insights, and coordinates joint source to sea actions. It has successfully advanced the adoption of the source to sea approach in policy, strategy, and funding mechanisms. Previously, Ms. Ruth served as Executive Director of Water Footprint Network, Conservation Program Manager for WWF Vietnam, and Regional Freshwater Manager for the Nature Conservancy. The stage is yours, Ruth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And let me just get my screen up there. Are you seeing seeing it in presentation mode?
Yes.
Full screen.
Great, excellent. So I've really appreciated the presentations through this morning, afternoon, and evening. And now what I want to do is take it down to a very local level and share some work that the Stockholm International Water Institute has done in Vietnam, applying the source to sea approach that my colleague Jose introduced a bit. So we have done two projects. One started with looking at plastic waste at the river basin level. We were working in the Vu Gia Tu Bon River Basin in central Vietnam. It was a fortunate river basin in the fact that it was all within Vietnam, but it crosses two provinces, and then, of course, the transboundary aspect going into the ocean. In the analysis in the Vu Gia Tu Bon River Basin, which was done using a waste flow diagram, what was discovered was that because of the higher levels of waste management services in the urban areas, the sources of plastic leakage were much more in the rural and coastal areas. And even though these are less populated. And so you can see that not only the percent of waste coming from the rural and coastal areas, but also the total amount per person is much higher in the rural and coastal areas. And I think this is a really important message to understand in this prioritization of where interventions need to be taken to control plastic waste, that we really need to understand the sources of that plastic. And as both Johanna and Lynn mentioned, the transport of that plastic into the river basin, the waterways, and out into the ocean. We use the source to sea approach to complement the circular economy approach. There's great benefits that can come by bringing these two together. From the source to sea perspective, we're looking at it, the value chain at a geographic level. So we're seeing the sources on land moving into the waterways and out into the marine environment. But by understanding those sources and the reduction of plastic leakage and the benefits that can come from that across the source to sea system, this can really drive the value of moving towards a circular economy to a higher level. So to increase the value of the resource recapture through a circular economy, reducing those impacts in the source to sea system, environmental, social, and economic impacts, therefore making the cost benefit analysis a better balance. So to delve into this a bit more deeply, we did a project in Hoi An, Vietnam, which is in the Vu Gia Tu Bon River Basin. We first supported them in developing an environmental strategy. And in that, they set the goal to have zero plastic pollution and to be able to help the local municipality in its role in reducing plastic pollution. We focused in on the waste part of the plastic value chain, because this is the part that is most influential through the municipality and the local community there. To do this, we brought together a range of stakeholders along the plastic value chain, the waste part of the plastic value chain, and initially started with focus groups at the sector level. So within the government, within the utilities, within the private sector, within civil society, and worked with them to really identify what were their contributions to controlling plastic waste and what were the challenges, as well as what would they need to be more successful. Then we brought those different focus groups and stakeholder groups together to do an interactive workshop where we now mixed up the different sectors and had them work together to understand those relationships between the different actors in their roles along the plastic waste value chain. And with this being in Vietnam, the informal sector was a very important part of the control of plastic waste, and of course, bringing it into a recycling resource. And so we also included the informal sector and the women's and youth unions to be able to really make sure that those who are both most impacted by plastic waste, but also have a lot to contribute to its control, were involved in the workshop. Through the workshop, we identified a range of actions that each party could take, either individually or jointly. And these ranged from policy changes to people in the women's union saying that they could talk to their neighbors and help them understand the importance of recycling plastic and controlling it so that it doesn't get into the waterways. So out of this, we were able to develop this accountability framework, which creates a picture of the relationships between the different actors in the plastic value chain and how they are related. In some cases, there are formal relationships. For instance, the city of Hoi An has a formal relationship with the Public Works Company through contracts. Whereas other relationships were informal and yet important for the control of plastic waste. And so with this accountability framework, then we can use this as a means to map the actions that have been identified both at the individual and joint levels, and to be able to then monitor those actions, the relationships between the different actors, and improve on our understanding of those relationships, as well as to improve on the delivery of those actions and monitor the impacts of them over time. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for your great presentation, introducing the detailed case study on Vietnam, including very comprehensive accountability framework. So now we would like to move to the Q&A session. So like mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, please submit the questions through the group chat box. So specifically to whom, specifying the speakers to whom which you like to direct each questions. So maybe while waiting for some questions from the audience, maybe I can ask one question to speak each speaker. So maybe first Miss Joanna. So I see the mapping hotspot of plastic discharges by river and coastal lines at your presentation, but I'm curious, how can we use this kind of data to promote the actions, especially the stakeholders, for the stakeholder at the upstream or middle stream of plastic value chain? So just this is my out of curiosity, but if you have any answer on this.
Yes, sure. Thank you for your question, Sayaka. Well, I think it's important to have the large picture in terms of in this case, the national contribution of plastic inputs into the sea at the national level, to be able to have a kind of a baseline against which to measure progress, in particularly if this baseline is built in a realistic way and really aggregating results from the very local level, as it is the case, and considering also real hydrological data and hydrological processes that lead to these riverine discharges. Also from a national perspective, to help to prioritize, for example, which are the rivers that are contributing the most to these discharges, especially if, for example, in Indonesia, there's these very ambitious targets of reducing plastic pollution. So this can also help to really focus on specific basins, potentially, for example, interventions not only in terms of prevention, but potentially cleanup. Even if I'm not such a big proponent of the cleanup, I think it's more important to actually focus on the upstream prevention. But I think also disseminating these results among stakeholders and population that can actually understand better how the communities that live in the upstream areas are actually also contributing to the problem. And of course, this is not only a behavioral issue. What we saw in Indonesia, for example, is that in the rural areas, almost 85% of the households don't even have a collection system. So it's actually leading to a large contribution And I think also this puts really the focus on intervening not only in the urban areas, but also the rural areas. And I think it's in line also with the Ruth has mentioned.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, under the limit of resources, I think this kind of data is very, very crucial for us. It's very important for us to identify the priority of actions. So maybe next question to the, okay, I found one question from the audience. So this question is to Ruth. So I'm going to read. So it's great to see co-creating method applied to identify actionable item. For the implementation of these items, feasibility of actions must be considered. What indicators do you plan to consider to prioritize and increase the feasibility of identified actions? So this is from Jovan, behavioral change expert at the UNFCCC Technology Mechanism. Thank you very much for the question. This question to Luz.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I think my camera is on. Yes, thank you for the question. Maybe just to explain a little bit that this was a short-term project, so we will not be following it through to implementation. However, going back to the presentation that my colleague Jose presented, we definitely want to see indicators across the 4 types of indicators that we identified there. And it's very important to recognize that in some cases, the actions that were identified were very close to no cost or low cost, because either they were more about awareness raising, like I mentioned, or they were activities that were needing to be done already by the different stakeholders. But the value of working at the co-creating way that we did is that then there was a better understanding of the linkage of their actions to other actors' actions, and the way that perhaps they could enable opportunities for improvements in other actors by doing their action in a particular way. So it's really about weaving a web of actions and the relationships between the different actors, and so that the whole comes together, let's say, greater than the sum of its parts. And like one outcome that came was a request from the informal sector to have more support from the government for having some land available for scrap collection. A very simple, low-hanging fruit, let's say, but something that could be improved quite easily and make a major difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Luz. I'm always impressed by the example, like your work, especially through listening to the actions through the participatory approach. So maybe we can ask I think another audience is about to write a question to you, Luz, but while waiting for that question, I'm going to ask a question to Dr. Mustafa. So you are working for the EEA, so how does the source-to-sea approach contribute to EU policy and efforts to mitigate the plastic pollution?
Thank you. The overarching EU strategy for plastic pollution to curb the plastic pollution is now, after 2021, the Zero Pollution Action Plan. It has 2 important targets. The EU aims to reduce the plastic litter at the sea 50% and microplastic releases at its source 30% by 2030. And the EA also is responsible from monitoring these targets. Monitoring these targets are made by proxy indicators, as we don't have a robust one type of indicator which can reveal all the truth. It's never the case, actually. So we use beach litter data. So we discovered that recently between 2015 and 21, the EU dataset says that 29% of beach litter decrease, and also 30-40% single-use plastics decrease. But this is not enough. This is just at the beach. So the report does not directly reveal the truth, all these indicators, but gives the policymaker in Brussels especially, and gives the citizens who are reading the report to understand where this comes from, and is it really decreasing at the source? Are the releases, mismanaged waste decreasing? And establishes connections between different EU policies, starting from the production phase to the litter at the sea, protecting the environment and sustaining good environmental status. The report is not doing it fully right now, but it's providing a pretty nice picture and very good as a start and needs to be improved.
Thank you very much for your answer to connect the current situation and that's application to the actions. So we have another question from Professor Ramasamy. And this question is to Luz. So she just wonder whether many of these models can be generalized. And as I understand, the local conditions may be varying. In my opinion, these models may need to be upgraded with the help of the local government or local players so that these proposals or models can be made very suitable for the suitable to the location rather than location specific, isn't it? Sorry,
Yes, thank you for that question. And this is something that we use in our source to see approach in the 6 steps as we're building that knowledge base of the biophysical system, the stakeholder social system, and the governance system. That we use 2 modalities. One is to do rapid assessments using data that is available already. Adding maybe a little bit to that data. But then we always engage the full suite of stakeholders in being able to validate and add to that view that we've seen through the rapid assessment. So it is very important to bring in the different perspectives and understandings that are there at the local level. So absolutely agree with you that this is a really important part of creating that shared knowledge base. That also makes it possible for the local stakeholders to have more ownership. I just want to say one really quick thing because I see time is running out. In terms of the previous question, the accountability framework can actually be used as a monitoring mechanism through creating an accountability group that creates a periodic assessment of their progress towards the different actions and the results of those actions so that the social aspect of bringing the stakeholders together is maintained through the monitoring process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luz, for your very complete answer. So before going to the closing remarks, so maybe we can ask one last question to Ms. Lin. So how can the IUCN share its data and guidance to facilitate the improved source-to-see outcomes? What platforms are available to use? So we appreciate if you can answer the question.
Sure, thank you. I will be very brief because I know we are out of time. We have, within our projects, we try to design wider approaches that use existing platforms that we work on. Panorama Platform of Solutions, which is UNDP, IUCN, and GIZ, for example, with Octo and others. We have an Ubuntu platform of solutions, which I'm happy to invite people to if they would like to come. It's the one I mentioned where we have about 325 practical solutions for solutions related to data, related to projects, but then our data and our guidance and the work that we're doing is part of the UNEP IUCN National Guidance for Plastic Pollution Hotspotting. And that material is all on this particular page. And the data we have for any of our projects always is open and available. It's most of our work is funded by overseas development assistance and governments. And so, of course, all of our data is then free and open. So happy to share it with others. And if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to take email questions as well and provide more info. And that link I just put in the chat is also with the UNEP IUCN guidance on plastic pollution hotspotting. So thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing very useful information. We definitely will check out that website, and thank you very much for the URL link. So as a closing remarks, I would like to hand it over to you, Mushtaq, for his closing remarks.
Thank you. So first of all, a big thanks to all the resource persons or the presenters and CV for making this really quite interactive and multidimensional. And then as we see, plastic pollution is a huge issue. And how we can address, I think we can address 3 ways: partnerships, partnerships, and partnerships. That means the national level partnerships, regional level partnerships, and the global level partnerships. So like a CV from, let's say, the Stockholm and UNEP office in Bangkok. So it's a global effort, for example. Then when we are working with the Mekong, is a regional level. Then we are working within the Thailand with the national government and with the Bangkok Metropolitan is within that national level and the regional local level. So I think with this note, I would really request everyone, including the participants and the resource persons, that let's work together, because this is a huge thing and no one can do alone this issue. So thank you again, and thank you very much, and have a great evening. Thank you.